Okay, we're right on schedule today, which is the first time I've been on schedule in a long time. So, getting started. We're getting everything started in the correct energy this morning, I guess. Even though I don't know if there's any such thing as the correct energy, but a definitely more smoother energy. So, okay, let's check in audio. Okay, we look good. Checking my internet. It's been a little dicey this morning, so we'll see how this comes out. I hate it when I do the whole thing and then the audio is choppy, but sometimes that happens. I'm not in the best internet connection, even though I've upgraded it numerous times. I feel like it's not like I'm in the middle of New York City, where it'd probably be a lot stronger. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? I wanted to dive a little bit more into how to discern which part of us we're going to listen to. Now, I had titled this, I'll probably go back and change the title a little bit, but like, who do we listen to? And we're going to take that more internal. What part of us do we listen to? You know, are we going to listen to, before I go into that, I will open the chat, but I usually open it toward the middle, around 25 minutes in. And so if you have a question, pop it in there and I will answer it a little bit later in the stream. I don't keep it up while I'm talking because it's a little distracting. It's kind of disrupts the frequencies of what I'm talking about. So unless I'm doing a straight Q&A, I always keep it closed till sometime in the middle. So the Q&A is usually toward the end. Okay, so who are we going to listen to? Who do we listen to? What do we do when we're not sure which part of us is talking? How do we discern if it's our human consciousness or it is our higher consciousness and the many aspects that make up our higher consciousness talking to us? You know, how do we tell the difference? And for a while, it can be hard to tell the difference because we're getting like different information, we tend to feel like we're talking to a different part of us, you know. And when I do say who do we listen to, for some of us it can be more direct. You know, like you might just really feel or hear, oh God, I'm supposed to do this. And sometimes it's just the thoughts we have. So don't discount the thoughts you have as to a different part of you trying to give you information. Now, the human consciousness doesn't have the information our higher consciousness has. You know, it only has the consciousness in that moment to look at what's going on around it and decipher a story around that. You know, it's going to put that human distortion around it, whatever it sees. It doesn't have the capacity to go forward. It only has the capacity to look back and then rearrange whatever you're seeing now to conform to what it's already seen. You know, it doesn't have the forward thinking. It doesn't have the future access, which you're going to call the future, mainly because these higher aspects of us, if we have not embodied them anchored them in our body, they are technically in a future timeline, right? Or they're in a different timeline, which to our human perception is going to be in the future because it's not here yet. Anything from our human perception that's not actually occurring is occurring in a future timeline because it's not in the present, even though it's just in a different timeline. Technically, we could jump to that timeline immediately if we had the frequency. We were in that frequency to do that. There's really no time to do a lot of these jumps. What slows us down is all the programming we have to clear to be able to get to the next space, get to the next level. It's not as easy as let me just say I'm there and I'm there. We have a lot of clearing to do to get there. And because we have a lot of clearing to do to get there, that's what takes a linear time. It doesn't have to, but because of our human programming and because of all the stuff we have to clear, it feels like it takes more time. That's why a lot of the timelines we were going through back maybe in our awakening or beginning of our ascension process, or even pre-awakening process, and that's just awakening to higher consciousness, and the ascension process is just anchoring in the consciousness into our body. You know, I had a comment that I'll see a lot of people talk about leaving human realities, but we also have to anchor in our higher line realities. You know, you can't keep living in a human reality and create another one too. You can't stay in your existing one and create a new one. You know, you can't stay in a human reality and create and live in a higher consciousness reality. They're two different bandwidths, they're two different frequencies, it's two different TV channels in a sense. You can't be in one and also be in another. You can only be taking part in the one you're taking part in. And if you're still interacting in it, you're still allowing it, you're still participating in it, you can't anchor in the next one. And this is a subject that our human consciousness does not like to talk about. It doesn't like to talk about leaving the ones behind, leaving the old timelines behind to go to the new ones. You know, it wants to be able to take the new ones and just shove them in to the old ones. You have the comfort of the kind of what is familiar, and that's really the only reason a lot of us stay in those human realities a lot longer, because even when they're not fun anymore, they don't make sense anymore, they stop working for us, but because there's a familiarity to it, there's a structure to it, there's a belief to it that we have ingrained into, we will set in there a long time. That's just what we do. It's not a personal, it's just our personal bias at that point to want to set in these timelines and retrofit parts and pieces of higher timelines together. You know, let me get my soul aligned job, but let me now shove that back into a very distorted relationship I have with a spouse, or a very distorted relationship I have with money, a very distorted relationship I have with other people, but let me take my soul aligned job and plug it into here. Technically now we've distorted both timelines. You know, it just can't be done. And that's why when we try to do that, it still doesn't feel right, because you're like taking a piece out of a different puzzle and trying to retrofit it into a place it doesn't belong. And technically it'll be just like, God, I can't even think of, I know this is in probably various movies. There's one movie in particular I'm thinking about, and I can't really think about which movie it is, but there is a movie I was thinking about where, you know, as soon as they try to bring an item across, it would disappear. I don't remember if that might have been Harry Potter. I don't remember. I don't feel like it is Harry Potter though, but because it couldn't exist. You know, it couldn't exist there. It could only exist in the timeline it was in. It can't exist in the new timeline. You know, it doesn't belong here, and it can't exist here. And that's kind of the same kind of thing. So when we start trying to align timelines, I mean, some of a lot of the videos I do that people, I feel like they enjoy the most are the ones when we talk about aligning realities. Because everyone's still trying to align, I don't want to say everyone, but a lot of us, we spend a lot of time trying to align the ones that are not highest aligned, because we don't want to leave them behind. And we've got too much skin in the game, we feel. We've got too many years involved. We have all these stories around why we can't leave. You know, why we can't. And usually because we don't really believe there's another timeline for us. And it's not the timeline we thought we would have. It's not the timeline we thought we wanted. So we really kind of set in, we're kind of stuck in how come. You know, how come this isn't work the way I want it to work? How come this isn't shaking out the way I thought it would? You know, we have to really be careful about who we're listening to. And I just don't mean the external. The external is a whole different video. We're going to focus more today on internally, what do we listen to? Internally, who's talking? You know, who am I really listening to here? I feel like this is higher consciousness, but when I really delve into it, it's just another aspect of my ego. It's just the other way. You know, if in one phase I would have not acted on something, and that was my go-to human program not to do it, you know, to kind of avoid, dip and dodge and not do anything. Okay, now I'm over here. So if the guidance I feel like I always get is we're going to go the opposite for a while, then now let me fight this system, whatever it is we're going to fight. Now let me be outspoken. Now let me go in there, you know, guns a-blazing, and really kind of fight through this. And that's still ego-based. It's an opposite reaction. It's a more conscious reaction to still a very unconscious program, though. We're doing something, it's just still kind of ingrained in the ego. We're still not sure what's highest aligned. We're just going to go the opposite way for a while, because it does help us get to, okay, now that didn't really work, even though I did kind of bust through a lot of energy doing that. Now what's going on? Now how can I tell what's highest aligned? How can I tell which way to go? When am I in my head about something? When do I have a lot of stuff coming up? And so we have to kind of peel this apart, and we have to really look at it from, you know, a lot of people say separate out your different, you know, separate out your physical body, separate out your emotional body, separate out your energy body, separate out your mental body, separate everything out into, you know, pull them all apart and look at what's going on with each one. You know, if I look at a thought I'm having, and the thought is, you know, you need to call this person, you need to do this, because our higher consciousness always acts from the future. We technically live from the future when we're living from our higher consciousness, because we know what we know what we're going to be doing, And now we're going to take the steps to get there. Now, granted, most of the time, they're not going to be linear steps to get there. They're not going to be do A, B, C, and D. It's more like do A, then Z. You're going to come back to L. Then you might hit G, and then you're going to go to B, and then we're going to be back to N again. They're not linear pieces. You know, like if you do a puzzle, you'd always, well, at least I was always taught, you do the outside first. You get the corners first, then you're going to build in the middle. There was a progression to doing it that kind of laid out the framework of the puzzle, and you'd go from there. It doesn't work like that in the higher consciousness reality, trying to put them together and figure out what your next move is. You know, it's because it's also the consciousness, until we anchor enough of it in to kind of understand that it's all kind of getting created as we create it. We know kind of our end game and what we're trying to get to, but a lot of the parts and pieces in the middle don't make a lot of sense. I mean, I can look back at a lot of decisions I made, which I thought at the time I was being conscious making them. I can go back and see where it was just my ego involved in it, and the ego made the decision, and it sent me down a whole spiral. I eventually ended up where I was supposed to end up in, but you kind of go into a kind of a branch, kind of an offshoot branch reality, we can call it. It's kind of technically a different timeline, but it's just the same energy kind of branch off from the one you were on. You know, it's kind of like I'm going to go all the way around. I'm going to work through a lot of programming, which I could have done a lot easier in the other timeline. But I'm going to go through all these more challenging obstacles over here to get to the same place I would have gotten to anyway. It's just we're taking the longer way around to get and going through more physical experiences. Because anything you do from your ego is going to take you in more physical experiences, because that's what shakes the ego loose. It's what breaks the ego down. It's what breaks our human down to where we just don't know what else to do. It's the human physical experiences. Where in our higher consciousness realities, we don't have to have those anymore. You know, there's sometimes, I'm going to have to walk that back. Sometimes we have to because we can't get to stuff on our own. But if we do have something occur, I know I had something occur a couple weeks ago, or I guess maybe a week and a half ago, and it kind of was like, oh crap! It kind of brought up a lot of fear, a lot of different emotions are coming up, and I have to look at those emotions and go, okay, as long as I have to look at that emotional body, you know, and look, okay, I have a lot of this stuff coming up right now. So let me clear all this stuff. Let me clear the fear. Sometimes we'll go on and do research. You know, even if I'm doing research knowing I'm in my monkey human mind doing it, it still gets the energy out in a sense. Okay, so let me look at, okay, what's the worst case human scenario here? You know, and sometimes we have to go there because it does clear the energy. You know, it gets the energy going, okay, well, if that's the worst that can happen, all right then, you know, let me just say, okay, then that's not that big of a deal anymore. It helps to get the fear out. It helps to kind of walk through the reality in a sense of what you're doing. You're kind of walking through energetically that human reality. You're kind of tracing it through and saying, okay, that's not my choice of what I would like to experience, but if that's highest aligned, then that's fine. I can kind of map out what that's going to be. But it's not my preference. I'd rather be able to clear this a different way. But we can't ignore what we're trying to clear. We can't ignore the emotional, what's coming up emotionally when we start having things happen to us. And in turn, when we have thoughts start to come through, and we have a lot of thoughts start to come through, we have to be able to look at that and say, okay, these are thoughts that are really, really bothering me. I'm really distressed by these thoughts. You know, they're really bringing up a lot of fear. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then our whole brain gets into it. You know, we get the whole mental body into it then. And then we start contriving and creating all these terrible stories that are what's going to happen. It brings up all these emotions, and the emotions, then we start creating the story around the emotion, then it starts feeding, it's a loop. It goes back, now the stories are feeding more of the emotions. Because anytime we're in our human ego, we're going to have the true test of what's going on when you start having thoughts, start thinking about something you're going to do. What's the emotion around it? What's the story around it? If it has a story, if it has a commentary, if it has a monologue around it on how all things that are going to happen, we're still getting messages, in a sense, from our human ego. You know, when we've contracted a whole story, when the whole story comes in, we are now in our human ego. We are not in higher consciousness at that point. You know, we're very much living still from our human ego, in a sense. That's the one that's kind of controlling our actions. And when I say controlling, that's the kind of the one we're listening to. But because it might seem like it's a different reaction, or it's a different way. I wouldn't have done it this way before. I would have done it this way before, and I'm going to do it this way before. It's kind of the opposite end of the ego. But we're still in that program until we can really look at something and say, do I have an emotion around it, or is there no story around it? Guidance we get from our higher consciousness, guidance we get from our higher consciousness aspects, even prior to anchoring them in. And anchoring them in can take years, because we have to clear all the distortions around how we feel about anchoring that in. You know, if you're trying to anchor in God consciousness, and, you know, which means we're going to be the prime creator of our reality. But when you look around your realities, you're not in charge of any of them. You're letting other people tell you everything you're supposed to do in them. You're not acting in that energy, which means you haven't embodied the energy yet. You can touch the energy. You can get some, you know, some people call them downloads, people call them information, you know, meditate and get the information. But until you start rearranging your life to those aspects, to those energies of those aspects, you're not embodying it in. You're just touching the consciousness. You're still disconnecting from the consciousness in a sense. And you're going to live your life ignoring that consciousness. You know, when I used to do channeling, which I always will highly recommend, people don't meditate, they don't channel. It's a great way to connect with yourself and higher aspects of yourself. And you will feel like you're getting information, you know, and it feels like it's coming down because those aspects of you are in a frequency you're not in yet. So it's higher than we are at that point. So it feels like it's coming down. You know, it does not feel, our consciousness has not expanded up. It hasn't engulfed it. It hasn't embodied in that frequency yet. So it feels very much outside of us. And as long as it feels outside of us, it's going to remain outside of us. It doesn't mean we can't take the information and just know we haven't embodied it in yet, because it's still also that separation from us. You see a lot of that separation when you talk about a lot of religions too. All the religions, you know, they keep all that stuff separate. When we're still looking at a religion as a separate thing, we're still looking at God as a separate thing, you know, Christ as a separate thing. It's still a separation state. It is where a lot of people go to start to connect with themselves. Still separation though. So even whether you go the spiritual path, whether you go the true religion path, and when I say true religion, just any type of the more organized religions, where to me spirituality has a kind of a different, it has kind of a different feel to it. They're both still separated states. They're still not looking at yourself as everything in a sense. They're still separated off. They're different way to get there. You know, they're a different activation path to get there. But if we still see all these separate things, you're still, in a way, farming out who we're asking for something, you know, who we're listening to for an answer. But when you get any kind of, and the dream world is a great place where you get your answers, I don't want to say answers, but guidance a lot of times, especially when you're not into meditation yet, you're not into a lot of it, if you're not into channeling, and you can only channel yourself. You know, I see a lot of fear around that. You can only channel yourself. There's nothing else out there you're going to grab into. That's all you can do. And that's what you're tapping into. Even people, I see people channeling alien races. It's still just an aspect of them. There's no deeper meaning to it really than that. They're just aspects of you. As soon as you achieve that aspect, all your aspects kind of eventually kind of merge together. And once you start seeing yourself as a multi-aspect and bringing in a lot of your different aspects, you start to see it in other people too. Yeah, you can see when someone goes human, when someone's in a galactic aspect, when someone is in, you know, their angel aspect. You can start to see when people start to flicker back and forth and realize how multidimensional everybody is, whether they realize it or not. They might not have embodied any of these aspects, which means they're not living from them, but they can hit them. You know, they can hit them here and hit them here. It's just when things get rough, when things get hard, they're going to go back to the default aspect. And for a lot of people, if they have any of their human aspect that still runs the show, if they live from that human consciousness in any way, when shit gets tough, that's where they're going. You know, they're going to go back to their human aspect. They're going to go back to their go-to. You know, so if you have someone that's living in their human consciousness, you know when the chips are down, that's not where you're going to go. You can't really depend on that because you know how that's going to be. You know how that's going to affect people. And you know how rough that can be. when you're, depending on someone being there, or you kind of built reality maybe around someone in a human consciousness, and things get rough and they're going back to their human consciousness, even if they had been prior to that extremely expanded and extremely willing to create and do something, but the minute it got hard, they're going to go back. And that's just kind of how we all were. The minute it gets rough on the battlefield, we're going to entrench down in a trench somewhere and kind of go into fetal position and wait till it all clears itself up. That's just more of the human way to go. Until you start getting into more of the higher aspects, more of the, even, you get into the archangels, you get into the warrior energy, you start embodying, and you don't keep persevering through a lot of that stuff, and you just keep going, because you get to the point where the frequencies of the human reality and the human consciousness, they're so far off now, you might go into it for a little while. I know if I get something that kind of feels like it hits me out of left field, and I'll kind of go into it, and when I go into it, my mind gets all into it. I might be into it for like an hour or two, maybe a day, depending on how rough the reality is. And then you kind of start pulling out of it, and you go, okay, that was just worked through a lot of energy there, but I don't know if I got much done besides working through the programming, which is a big thing. Did I get to what was highest aligned? Not exactly yet, but I got through what wasn't. Sometimes when you might go through a couple iterations of what's not highest aligned and go, okay, well, that didn't really end the reality. Because the most important thing is, for me now, is this the highest aligned thing I can do? I don't care if it's the easiest thing for me to do. Now, in the long run, it will be the easiest thing for me to do, because I've gone through enough realities doing it the other way to realize, even though that seemed like the easiest path, it was not the highest aligned path. And normally the highest aligned path is not what our human wants to do. It's not what we would choose to do. But when we start really dissecting what our human's gonna kind of the instructions we're gonna get from our consciousness there, our human consciousness, what do we do? Really look at the messaging, look at the story that's attached to it, and really pick apart the story. Like, do I really believe any of this is gonna happen? Do I really any of this is gonna come through this way, or any of this is gonna come through this? Do I really feel like these are possible things that are gonna happen, or do I not believe that? Because when we still kind of are going into those stories, and we're going into those thoughts and those feelings and how we kind of feel about a lot of this stuff, it really is a way for us to bust through so much of our programming, to really realize we don't really believe that anymore. But when we're in the middle of a lot of this stuff, it can be tough to make those choices. We really have to wait until we have no emotion around it. Then look at it and say, okay, what is the highest line thing for me to do? Is it the highest line thing for me to do to inconvenience other people? That's a big one that our human consciousness will want to bring other people into the reality and inconvenience them in some way. Ask them to take on the brunt of the reality, because we don't want to have to align it ourselves, and we don't want to have to do whatever fill in the blank there. Whatever we're going to have to do to align it ourselves, we don't want to do that. So now we're going to drag other people into it. And that's one of my tells too. When I know I'm tackling something from my human consciousness, if I'm trying to drag other people into the reality that haven't offered to be there yet, they haven't offered to be in the reality, they haven't offered assistance in the reality, even if they know about the reality happening, they don't, or they just don't know about it yet. And even if they don't know about it yet, my universe has set it up where so far it's remained separate from them. Because sometimes we don't know who to include in our realities. Like, is this person supposed to be there? From what I could do a lot of times, my trying to align a lot of different realities, my experience with that is, if people aren't there, they're not supposed to be in it. If they're there, they'll show up to be there. And if they're not showing up to be there, or some coincidences, where there are no coincidences, but your universe doesn't set up for those people to show up, they are really not in your resource bag for this reality to align it. You got to look at what's here. What do I have here? What's in my resource bag here? What am I supposed to do here? What do I have? The tools to align the reality. Do I have the time? Do I have money? Do I have, energy? Money and time are just energy. So we just look at everything we have here. It's like, what do I have available? If I don't have these things available, it's kind of like right away I know, oh, well, I can't use those. It's like even playing Dungeons and Dragons. If you don't have, if these are not in your arsenal, we can't use them. And that's kind of what we have to look at. What do we have right now? What do I have in my my satchel, and what am I going to get out to be able to, align this? What do I have available? Because that's what I'm supposed to use. And if I don't have those things, it's a possibility those things might show up before you have to make, if you have this decision has to be made by the 4th, or if you have a timeline on something, which sometimes we do. Sometimes we do have a timeline on something. Sometimes we realize those timelines are bullshit and they don't really matter. That's more of the human consciousness, the whole human collective is putting a timeline on something that really doesn't matter. And sometimes that's a lot of that too, to see if we go into that fear of, oh my God, I have to have it done by this date. Sometimes you'll feel like, I have to have a way to proceed by this date. I have to know what is highest aligned here. Look at what we have in front of us. Look at what we have been presented with. And if these other people aren't there, dragging other people into a reality because we don't want to deal with it, we don't want to maybe take the harder, what we are going to perceive as our human, as the harder route, tells us a lot. It doesn't mean we can't ask for certain things we would like. It's like, I don't want it to go down this way. I don't want to have to align a reality like this, but if this is the highest line, okay. But I would rather have, can you bring me A, B, C, and D? And then let's see what we have here. And sometimes our universe will bring it, sometimes it won't bring it. It kind of depends. If not bringing it gets us to clear more programming and more fear than bringing it, then there's a good possibility you won't have it, or you won't have exactly the, sometimes we'll have exactly what we need to align it, other times we won't. I did a video, I don't know, a couple of days ago, I don't really remember, might have been a week ago, about why a lot of times we don't get money to align realities, because if we had the money to align them, then we would do that all the time. In the human realities, money kind of fixes everything in a sense. It's very distorted realities, because that's the only thing that's valued in the human collectives, in those consciousness, in those realities. So money just fixes everything. But because of that, we never have to delve into our human program. We never have to clear that stuff. We never can get to that next step. We'll use our money to kind of paper over everything. And that's why a lot of those people who have set those realities up for themselves, when it comes to awakening and ascension, they go through a lot of different types of things to get them there, to push them out of the human realities, if they've always used money to kind of cover it up. And so for a while, we don't get money to fix any realities. We have to figure out other ways. We have to get off of that as a crutch, in a sense, of trying to fix our life. We start to see money in a different way. We start to see it for everybody. How can I enhance the collectives with this? What if I'm going to put out more content, if I'm going to do this, what can I do to enhance everybody? What can I do to push everybody forward? The money is technically, it's not for us, it's for everybody. Whereas when we're in our human consciousness, it's just for us to fix everything. So that is why for a majority of us, money gets removed for sometimes years and years and years and years. Or you have just enough, you're kind of going through what you would have called, what a lot of us would have called, boy, this is really kind of, it feels very impoverished in a sense, because of maybe you have a lot more in your human realities, then you start transferring over and you have very little money to work with. It's kind of the higher consciousness frequencies of, and it's kind of paralleling, other timelines. And human consciousness, that's a lot rougher. But for us, this feels rougher, so you have to kind of be able to look at the other side of that too, and go, if I did this and strictly in a human consciousness, look how much rougher it would be than doing it in this frequency, going through, different iterations of not having a lot of not having the money to pull on, and not having the money to kind of, as the MacGuffin, to fix every reality. Let me just get out my checkbook, let me fix this, and then I'm going to get out my checkbook and fix this one. But we never have to learn how to align them in that way. And that's why eventually we get stuff we can't align with money. And that's where you see a lot of stuff that happened during COVID. That was one of the big things. It didn't matter. It was one of those realities where money wasn't going to smooth over those realities. It wasn't going to have that kind of effect anymore. So as we start to look at what do I do? What am I going to bring in? What do I have? Who can I bring in? Who is contacting? Sometimes we'll just get people who might contact us in these moments, and maybe they're supposed to be in the reality. We have to kind of take a check. Sometimes we have a test to see, are you going to drag these people back into a reality that you're trying to align, because it'll be easier. Might not be easier on them, but it'll be easier on you. Or are they supposed to be here? Is their role to play out a certain thing in this reality? But we really have to be clear on what we're trying to align, why we're trying to align it. Are we trying to align something because we want to avoid judgment, shame, blame, guilt, all these emotions, anger? Are we trying to avoid these things? So are we trying to align so I don't have to go through that? Are we trying to avoid different things? Are we trying to align it to just close it out of our life and let me align this so this chapter goes away? You're going to see a lot of this stuff going on. I'm sure I'm not the only one that's had kind of stuff hit out of left field, because we are in eclipse season. And when you start getting into eclipse season, you start to have sometimes those major hits come in. These major distortions in your reality. I talk a lot about having the little things kind of here and there. You kind of know they're not aligned, but they can still sit over here for a while, but I know at some point I've got to deal with them. But right now I don't have the energy, whether it be time, money, whatever, to deal with these. It's going to sit over here for a while. There does come a time when your frequency gets to a point where these eclipses come through and all the stuff that is so distorted now to your new frequency will go out very quickly, and it'll be something you have to deal with right away. And a lot of times we do have time limits on those because, one, our universe has let them hang around for a while. It hasn't forced us to align them because we really weren't at a place yet to align them. We didn't have the information yet to align them. We didn't know how to align them. So we have to start bringing all that in. Sometimes it'll have, okay, well, let's have the worst thing happen here to see how they do on this. Let's see how she does on this if the worst part happens here. And then it happens, we're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. Okay, well, that wasn't that bad. Kind of trucking through the reality and saying, okay, well, even if all that stuff happens, that's not the end. None of that is that tragic. Because in our human mind, we're going to build it up as this terrible, terrible thing. And when we really try to go down the road, I'm like, okay, that's really not that tragic. Not the way I want to proceed. A lot of times we can have that conversation too. This is not the way I want to proceed with it, but if this is how it goes down, then that's how it goes down. And it's not my preference, but okay, that's how we're going to roll the dice here. That's how we'll roll the dice in this reality to align it. Once you're clear, once you can get to that place, you don't have the emotion around it. And you might go through a couple iterations where, okay, let me get more information about this reality. Let me call, if you have a conflict with the person, let me call this person. Let me see where I'm at here. Let me see where they're at here. You might feel very much called to do that. Instructions that come from our higher consciousness are usually, to me, just, you got to do this. There's no story around it. The only thing it might bring up is fear. I might have the emotional body get pissed off about it and go, oh my God, I have so much fear, I don't want to do that. Then you kind of know you have to do it. Usually when there's fear involved, I kind of know that's where I have to go. Sometimes I know this might not be aligning it, but it's a first step to clearing the fear so I can see how I do align it later. We cannot align anything when we have a lot of fear going on in any part of or any step of trying to align this, because the fear gets in the way of our next information on what we do next. Information we get from higher consciousness or higher aspects is really just, you gotta go do this. Our mental body doesn't get involved in the sense of there's a big story around this. Let me tell you why you have to go do this, and this is why this is important. The why comes with our human consciousness immediately to convince us we have to go do it. It's going to paint this horror story if we don't go do it. We're going to lose the job, we're going to lose the person, we're going to lose the opportunity. You got to go do it now. This is why, or everything's going to fall apart if you don't do this. Our higher consciousness, higher mind consciousness comes in after we do it. We clear the emotions attached to doing it. And normally it's a lot of fear. Sometimes it can be shame, blame, guilt. We clear all that about having to do the thing we got to do. And sometimes it's doing many steps along the way. Then we can tap into the higher mind consciousness of, okay, this is why you had to do that. This is the reason. There's not the whole story to convince you to do it. It's just the reason behind why you had to do that. And now you have the access to that because you cleared the emotions that were blocking that information. That's why we had to get there. That's why we had to kind of go through those iterations. So, okay, I'm going to check my chat. Oh, hello. Okay, so I think that kind of has done that to death at this point. As far as talking about this subject. So if I don't have any questions, I think that's going to be it for today, and I've got to go see how this came out because my internet bandwidth, I've been moving it, my computer, usually I have no problem right here, but every time I kind of because I do see it glitching a little bit. I really hope this came out a little bit better than I think it might have come out. So, okay, I think that's it. And I will keep sticking to my Thursday schedule here, and I will see everyone next time. Bye.